Let's start with the big question about leadership from the movie Die Hard. Brian, talk to me about Hans Gruber and why Hans Gruber is actually a really good leader.
This is going to be so much fun. We're doing our Leaders series where we're examining leadership lessons from the other angle of maybe people who finally don't succeed, typically in our movies. And I would love to assert that Hans Gruber is possibly the most skilled and competent leader in all of movie villaindom. And that's partly why he's such a great character. Like, that's why everybody loves him so much, right? So in the original Die Hard movie, which is aged quite thoroughly now, but is still quite entertaining, Hans rolls in at the head of a team that has a very clear and incredibly detailed plan with a lot of nuance to it. He's assembled this really cool team. There's a variety of skill sets on the team. They're rolling in with a very clear long-term mission that they're not telling everybody about, and then some subterfuge and obfuscation and some distractions that they are telling everybody about. And they're super focused, and everybody seems committed to the plan. And it's fun to watch him for most of this movie be hyper competent, and then it's fun to watch him sort of descend into reactivity mode. But I would argue that based on the level of planning and skill that Hans displays, he basically deserves to win. Like, the only reason that he doesn't succeed at the thing that he's trying to do is that he comes up against somebody who does increasingly ridiculous superhuman things. In the context of a increasingly ridiculous superhuman movie, of course. But yeah, the Hans deserves to win. He should have walked out of there and be sitting on the beach earning 20% somewhere right now.
I think it's interesting to think about Hans from the team perspective, and I know we'll talk about this a little bit, but he is a type of leader who builds a organization around him of people who are more competent than him, which is something that we rarely see because it takes somebody who has some level of humility to do that, and who also has a level of trust in the mission and the process, especially if you're going to be somebody like Hans who has very low morals and is willing to do just about anything in order to accomplish the mission. It's like when you're a Sith Lord, for example. Like, if the morals are so low that you're willing to do whatever it takes to accomplish the mission, then it's kind of risky to have people who are more competent than you around you, because assumedly, if you need to be sacrificed in order to accomplish the mission, they're going to do that. They'll just take your share and divide it up evenly.
Yeah, so I love that you brought Darth Vader in here, because we did our last couple episodes on Vader as a villain. And as a middle manager, as a character, Vader is kind of the anti-Hans Gruber, right? Vader is all about himself. He's all about his own power. He's all about his own motives. He's all about protecting his secret knowledge. And he displays very little engagement with the stormtroopers. Right? He's just kind of going off and doing his thing. Whereas what we see is, Hans has clearly built this team of diverse skills that are better than him at specific things. He's got a technical person, and he's got a very American-seeming front man, and he's got people that can do explosives, and he's got people that are hyper-violent. And, so he's got this diverse team around him, and he's not intimidated by having specialists that are outside of his area. And he's made the incredibly detailed plan, which also we never see Darth Vader doing. He's looking over the hill. He's thinking about the contingencies. He's 2 steps ahead of everybody else for nearly the entire movie. But also, he's not afraid to get his hands dirty. He'll go down in the trenches with a team. He'll go check on the explosives. He does a lot of on-the-fly prioritizing, adapting to things that change. He's calm, but he has a sense of urgency. Like, he's actually pretty compelling.
He is. You can see in another world, if he doesn't have that fatal flaw in his morality, and he gets aligned with a mission that's honorable, maybe somehow Hans Gruber becomes the type of leader who can, I don't know, be on the other side of history.
Right. Or maybe if he just doesn't run into a John McClane on a particularly bad day.
Yeah, or at least he could get rich and accomplish his own mission.
Yes. He's, like I said, I feel like he deserves to win. So,
all right, Brian. Well, let's hit the intro here.
Hi, I'm Brian Nutwell.
And I'm Drew Paroz.
And we are on a journey to learn how to lead wisely by becoming better leaders, touring fantastic worlds and inspiring lore by going on this WonderTour.
We connect leadership concepts to story context because it sticks to our brains better. You can find out more at WonderTourPodcast.com or by searching Lead Wisely on YouTube.
Let's look at what Hans does particularly well, right? So one of the things that strikes me as watching this movie again for the 100th time, but recently, right, is that in a strange way, he's an extremely good judge of character. He sizes people up very quickly. He's clearly picked sort of broadly competent and committed people to work on his team. But as he encounters other people in the course of the movie, he very quickly decides how to take advantage of them, right? He talks to the CEO or whatever is the president of the company, Takagi, and recognizes that he's not going to cooperate. So he just takes him out. He talks to Holly, John's wife, and recognizes that she's very competent and uses her as a voice to the team. He talks to Ellis, the kind of smarmy lawyer that everybody hates, and immediately assesses that he's completely incompetent and, takes advantage of him, but then takes him out. So and he handles the police and the FBI similarly. So he's got a good sense of how to navigate the people that he encounters and what the best way is to manage them to achieve his games. How do you get to that point? What do you think he's, is that an innate skill set or is that something you can cultivate?
That's a good question, because we all look at those leaders and think, well, that's the type of leader that I'd like to be. Regardless of my personality and my experiences, I would like to be the type of leader who can operate at the edges. Now, the challenge is we all have our own baggage and experiences and everything else that keep us from being able to do that. Some of us are more detail oriented, which makes it seem like we need to be involved in every nook and cranny of the plan and that we need to micromanage to make sure that others are successful. Others of us like to just operate at the highest of levels in the vision and the strategy. And when we're operating up there, we don't need to understand anything about the specialists. We just have to trust that they can complete their processes. And what we see is, in order to be able to pull together these competencies, you have to be able to do some of each. To me, the only way that I find to be able to do that is you have to just cultivate strong relationships with people who are more skilled than you. And it can be within your team, within your organization, or outside your team or organization. I don't know what it is about me, but I want to get fast feedback on anything I do, and I want to get it from the smartest person who knows the most about the things that I'm trying to test, build, present, tell a story, whatever it is, right? I want that feedback early on. And so I have to surround myself with people who are better than me at almost everything. Otherwise, who is going to give me that feedback to let us know, hey, is the new strategy that we came up with actually a good strategy, or is it just good for where we're at currently? Is it just good given where we're coming from, the previous strategy we had? You only have that if you have somebody who knows the technical side of whatever it is you're trying to build or do, who understands the financial side of what you're doing, who understands the relational side of what you're doing, who understands how to develop an organization and how to develop leaders and skill sets.
That's awesome. No, you said a couple things in there that I really like. The idea of surrounding yourself with competence intentionally, I think works at a couple levels, right? It works on the team level of I want to have people that are very good at individual things so that the team has a broadly diverse skill set and can attack more complex problems. But also I want to socially or professionally surround myself with people that maybe don't have a reporting responsibility or aren't directly on my team or aren't even in my area, but who have an approach to the world or a skill set or a viewpoint that I respect that can sort of provide context for me. It's just, like you said, it's a way of making our brains bigger, right? Of I don't have to understand everything if I have good mentors, if I have good advisors, if I have good reference points. But to me, both of those things go back to the ego, right? Go back to what we've talked about in the past of if you think that you're Luke Skywalker and you're the hero and you're going to solve all the problems, if you think that you're John McClane, then you may or may not be asking for help. But if you think that your job is to be the mentor and to help others and to learn from others and sort of, help push things forward, if it's not about you being personally awesome, but it's about understanding the world, then you can sort of let go of that, the intimidation or the resentment or the, one-upmanship that goes with well, I have to be best at all the things.
Yeah, I think Hans does a good job of that. He, like you said in the intro, he has these people who each have their own unique skill set. The one guy's much better technically than he is, and he trusts that guy. He's not second guessing. No, you should be able to cut those locks faster. which is what you sometimes get with leaders.
Right. No, that's a really good point. Like that's a good interaction where he's like, okay, so I brought you here to do this special thing. You can do the special thing. And you know, and the deal's like, yes, it's going to take me this long to do this and this long to do the other part. And then this is the part that I can't do that I need help with. It's like, okay, as a leader, I'm going to go work on that. Like I got a plan for the part that I didn't, you know, that you aren't reasonably able to do. Right. And so this whole plan, like the whole thing of what that they're trying to accomplish, which turns out to be just a heist, like they're just trying to steal an extremely large amount of money. Right. He's the leader who's in the position of looking over the hill. Like I see down the road, these are the things that need to happen in the order to get us to the place that we want to be. And here's the roadblocks we've got to overcome. And I've got a plan to attack each one of those. And I'm going to bring in the right people or arrange the circumstances so that those individual components can happen in the right order. Like that's really powerful. And that's not, like you say, when we come from a point of being a specialist, when we come from a point of being hyper competent at a specific thing, that's not necessarily what we're naturally good at. But it is achievable if you dedicate yourself to like, I don't have to be good at all the things, but I do have to be good at zooming out and looking over the hill and understanding context. Like get your experts involved, get your advisors involved, do the homework, do your studies, you know, read your magazines, whatever it is. Like that's achievable. Like we aren't all going to be, you know, Oppenheimer from one of our previous episodes where he was both the visionary and maybe individually better at physics than everybody else in the Los Alamos lab. Like that's maybe not a thing you can aspire to be, is to be the smartest person in the room who also has the biggest picture. Like that's a little crazy. But the idea that you can use your technical base or your whatever existing competence you have and then start to zoom out and and be the one that provides context and to be the one that does some planning and to be the one that does the research, like any of us could do that.
I think that's good, Brian. I think we'll flesh that out even a little bit more as we get going here into our mountaintop and practical application. So, why don't we kick this over to our mountaintop? Can you set us up here for this scene?
Right. So in the movie context, they're trying to, you know, break into this incredibly secure vault that has multiple layers of locks, and they have a password to get through one thing, and then they have a bunch of mechanical things that they have to get through. But the problem is they're in this giant building, and this thing has got an electromagnetic lock, which sounded really cool in 1984, whenever this movie came out. You know, and you can't possibly do anything about it because it's powered by the city infrastructure to the whole building. And so the specialist is unable to deal with that problem. He can get them to the point of that wicket, but then he can't get them through that. And so, like, what are we going to do? This is going to take a miracle to solve this problem. So what we see in the movie is that this is a foreseeable problem. It's a difficult thing, but it's a foreseeable problem. And they describe the solution in the setup of the problem. Like, oh, well, we can't do anything about it because the power is connected to the city grid. So what we find out in the course of the movie was that despite the fact that they are just there for a heist, Hans has been messaging to the outside world the whole time that they're terrorists, that they want their revolutionary brothers in arms freed, and that they're punishing the company for its sins, and they've got all these political aspirations. And so what that does is it brings in the FBI. And the FBI has a standard terrorism playbook, part of which is to cut the power to the supply of wherever they're hanging out so that they're sitting in the dark and they're scared. So he's seeing far enough over the hill that he's like, okay, I've got your miracle right here. I've got the FBI.
That's good because it connects back to what you keep saying here, which is definitely going to be one of our key takeaways. The job of the leader is to see over the hill, and to see over the hill sometimes requires diligence and just effort being put into like research and endeavor. It takes that, right? But it also takes collaboration because no one person can see over the hill. And this is definitely applicable as we look at business and technology. Nobody has enough information to just be able to figure out where the roadmap should go, whether it's a product roadmap and how are we going to develop out this solution that we're working on, or whether it is like an overall business strategy, or even just your life. If you just look at me individually, like where do I want to go in life? I am not by myself suitable to understand where I need to be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, because I have not yet lived that part of life. I would be much better off, and nor do I have all the information about where the world, the external environment is going. I'd be much better off to seek counsel from others to be able to, as you put it, see over the hill.
Right. And as we're talking about this, it kind of occurs to me that we talked a little bit about judging character and understanding other people's sort of motivations and sizing up. If you surround yourself with competent people, then you'll recognize competence when you see it. But I think the other thing that Hans is displaying, which is not entirely not entirely reasonable for us to do all the time, but he's very good at understanding motivations, not just at a personal level, but at an organizational level. Like, he understands how the police are going to behave. He understands how the FBI are going to behave. He understands how the hostages are going to behave. Like, he's trying to sort of manage his way through, like, understanding these, not just relationships, but the intrinsic motivations, and how can you leverage those to get in the direction that he wants to go. He understands these, like, intrinsic motivations that these different groups have, or these different organizations have, and how he can leverage those to get where he wants to go. And so having the FBI cut the power for him and solve his problem when they think they're solving their problem is a classic, like, Dale Carnegie, 7 Habits of Effective Leaders negotiation synergy thing. But it's pretty funny to watch on screen.
That is good. And yeah, like you said, you can't do that all the time. There's not always going to be the opportunity where you're like, well, we really need this wall knocked down, but we don't have the right, like, specialized resources to knock this wall down. But what if the people who are in charge of holding the wall up knock the wall down for us? And that is very effective in change management. That's exactly what you need to do sometimes. It's like, sometimes there is a upholder of the current way of doing things, and that person is very staunchly defendant of the way we do things today. And you come in and you're like, okay, I'm not going to be able to just straight up convince you that there's a better way. It's not a person who, and again, this isn't a knock on them, it's just not a person who values logic as the highest form of being convinced of something.
Or they might just not have the same motivations you do, right? They might not value the goal that you're going after.
Yeah, so instead, is there another way? Is there a way we can convince this person for a different reason that, like you said, is their own motivation that they should knock the wall down? And then now we just have a way. We could just drive right in with the new ideas and plant them.
So this is the whole Inception movie, right? This is the making somebody else think it's their idea, which is a basic negotiating technique. He's also got a little bit of the Huckleberry Finn, like, oh, you really want to paint the fence for me situation going on.
Yeah.
Here. So yes, you got to respect that. And like I said, at that level, with that level of drama, of course, maybe isn't a practical win that you're going to get a lot of time. But the idea that you're playing other people's motivations so that they align with yours, even, in this case, somewhat cynically, but the idea that you would be sensitive to what other people want and be able to take advantage of that insight, those are attributes that would make someone a skillful leader. And I think the last thing we need to say here, of course, is that we spent a lot of time in the last 113 episodes developing this context of the magnanimous leader. And of course, Hans Gruber is not that, right? We have the basic problem that he is deeply immoral and that he's perfectly happy to, lie, cheat, steal, and murder on his way to getting his goals. But the aspirational part of it, the fun thing about studying him, right, is that he's got this big picture, he's broken it down into individual chunks, and he's sort of figured out how to solve the individual problems. Like, we have to get into the building, and we have to lock down the building, and then we have to get hostages, and then we have to, get into the vault, and then we have to figure out a way to get out without everybody knowing that we've gotten away with all the money. Like, so he's trying to solve these individual problems at a modular level without maybe being the specialist that can solve all of them himself. And that is a thing that you can aspire to.
Definitely. And we'll talk in the next episode a little bit about how that falls apart. The perfect execution of the plan, when it starts to fail, then what do you do? But for now, let's talk about the practical application of this episode. We've started to get in on this a little bit, but for practical application, how is Hans Gruber a good leader? Hans Gruber is a good leader because he's able to see the big picture, and he's able to break it into actionable components. That's what you're telling us, right, Brian? Mm-hmm. And then he does not need to execute each of those actionable components for himself. He is able to leverage others who are better even at executing. He's able to leverage teams, not just individuals, to execute on those individual components.
Right. The natural state of a diverse team with diverse skill sets and viewpoints is that they're going to be working on misaligned tasks, right? They're just going to go off and do things that they see, right? So the role of the leader, your job, if you're in charge of this diverse team that you've built, is to make sure that they're all bought into a high level mission and to make sure that they understand the connection between the building blocks so that they are confident that if they go do their thing, that the other pieces will fall into place. And that's not the natural state of the world. Like, that's a thing that takes quite a bit of energy to manage, but nobody else can do that except the person in the leadership role.
And oftentimes we find that either ourselves or others aren't doing that in a leadership role. And that's when you see misalignment in the organization. There's misalignment for many, many reasons, but one of the most common ones is the leader is trying to do too much, or the leader is not communicating well enough to each of the individuals who have the actual capacity and capability to do the things to be able to execute on it. I've seen that a million different times where the leader is extremely competent, maybe a Darth Vader type, right, who can go in and solve the problem and get things done. But then all they do is spend their time managing all the exceptions because they're
Yeah.
not properly communicating and managing the change that they're trying to implement. And so they're constantly getting pushback at every single angle, like, or they're getting not even just pushback, but sometimes from their own teams. They're getting opposition within the teams because the teams don't clearly understand what their role is and what other people's roles are. So I feel like that's one thing we can take away here.
Right. Yeah. And especially with people that come from a technical background or from a specialist background, the failure mode is you turn into a firefighter, you turn into a super specialist, and you just want to keep chasing reactively individual problems. And so, yeah, we don't see that here. We see, Hans Gruber's really good at not getting dragged into specialist tasks. He's willing to get his hands dirty. He's willing to go do individual tasks where he needs to help out and show the team that he's in. But he's not dragged into that. He's very focused on, like, oh, anyway, our big goal is still this, so we still need to get this done. Like, just lock this off, get this out of the way so we can go work on our problem. So that's, he's good at that. But the other failure mode of leaders can be being too zoomed out, like, and not understand where individual pieces of the plan aren't working. Right. So, okay, great. I've got a perfect plan. I understand how the blocks fit together. If block 3, the specialist in that role, isn't getting it done or doesn't understand how it's fitting or is causing trouble or whatever, if you just assume that everything is fine because your plan is perfect, that's also not okay. That also doesn't get you the job done.
And that's what we're going to talk about in the next episode is what happens when the plan falls apart, what happens when your opponent is able to get ahead of you and be more proactive than you are. And this is a natural ebb and flow of competition, whether it's competition in business, whether it's just opposing values or views, opposing ways of leadership. There's always going to be this natural ebb and flow. And that will cut off for today, will be what we'll talk about in the next episode.
It was fun to examine all of the leadership traits that Hans Gruber does exhibit in this movie because, like I said, he does things well enough that you almost feel like he should have gotten away with it. But of course he doesn't. And so in our next episode, we'll talk about, like, why doesn't Hans win? Like, what does that failure mode look like?
So what are our key takeaways?
So we talked about the leader's job is to be the one that looks over the hill and to identify the plan in its large modular blocks and figure out how the relationships between those blocks work, and to keep everybody focused on those elements because nobody else can do that. And then, having done that, bring the right specialists in, get the team together so that you have the right pieces in place, whether they're on your team or whether you're leveraging other organizations to do the things that need to be done, right? So kind of understand how to get all the individual challenges through, and then be very hands-on in sort of trying to manage the exceptions as they happen, but not like I personally have to solve all the problems, but like, let's just make sure everybody's staying focused on the big picture. Like, those are things that I think we can say he does really well, including the experience to judge motivation, judge competence, judge your interactions with people, judge your interactions with other organizations as to, like, what's going to go well.
Yeah, he's able to read the situation really well, and we didn't talk about how to do that necessarily, but he's also able to read character. And we kind of talked about that. We talked about how that's a really tough thing to learn, and you just grow it over time, and some people innately can do it better than others. But really, the best way to be able to pick up on what other people are doing and learn from them is just to surround yourself with super competent people.
Right. You get two benefits from that. You get I have competent people to advise me and help me, but you also get I just start to understand what that looks like. Right. So I'm more familiar with what the modes look like of somebody that is confident and knows what they're doing and what wisdom sounds like. And the more you surround yourself with, then when you get something that isn't quite right, you're more sensitive to it.
Good stuff, Brian.
All right, this was fun. All right, I'm looking forward to episode 2. Why doesn't Hans Gruber get to win? He should be sitting on a beach earning 20%. I'm still kind of mad about that. All right, looking forward to that. We hope you guys had fun with us this week, and you'll come back and join us for that one next week. In the meantime, just remember, as always, as Hans learns, character is destiny.